Blood soaked through Willow Reed's tattered dress as she crawled deeper into the abandoned silver mine, darkness swallowing her like a hungry beast while her consciousness faded in and out with each labored breath. They had left her for dead, and without help, she soon would be. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving Nevada landscape surrounding the boomtown of Rawhide showed no mercy to those who crossed the wrong people. Willow had made that mistake, though it hadn't been her choice. She'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing something she shouldn't have seen. She remembered the blows raining down on her body, the cruel laughter of the men who had dragged her to this desolate place. The Silver Queen mine had been abandoned for years after its veins had run dry, leaving behind only splintered support beams, rusted tools, and the ghosts of broken dreams. Now it would be her tomb. Willow's fingers scraped against the rough-hewn walls as she tried to pull herself further into the mine shaft. Each movement sent daggers of pain through her ribs. She could taste blood in her mouth, metallic and warm. In the darkness, she couldn't tell how badly she was injured, but the stabbing pain in her side told her it was severe. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice emerged as little more than a rasp. "Please, someone." No one would hear her. No one even knew she was missing yet. The boarding house where she'd taken a room would not miss her for days. As a traveling seamstress who kept to herself, people barely noticed her presence, let alone her absence. Willow leaned against the cold stone wall, tears mixing with the blood on her face. She had come west for a new beginning after losing her family to influenza back in Boston. 23 years old and alone in the world, she had hoped to build something for herself. Now, that dream would die with her in this forgotten hole. With what little strength remained, Willow let out a desperate cry that echoed through the abandoned tunnels before slumping against the wall, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. Miles away, Vaughn Zeller guided his horse along a seldom-used trail that skirted the foothills northeast of Rawhide. At 30 years old, he'd spent most of his adult life working as a cowhand throughout the Western Territories. His latest employment had ended when the ranch he worked for was sold, leaving him to seek new opportunities. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape as Vaughn considered his options. He'd heard tell of work at one of the cattle operations near Carson City. If he pushed on through the evening, he could make it to the next town by nightfall and continue his journey come morning. His horse, a sturdy Palomino gelding named Buck, suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward. Vaughn tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. In territories like this, hesitation could cost a man his life. "What is it, boy?" Vaughn murmured, scanning the surrounding terrain. Buck snorted and pawed at the ground, refusing to move forward. Vaughn's eyes narrowed as he studied the rocky slopes ahead. He didn't see any movement that might indicate bandits or hostile natives. No dust clouds from approaching riders. Just the wind whistling through the scrub brushland. Was that something else? He dismounted, ground tying Buck before moving forward cautiously. The sound came again, faint and distant, but unmistakably human. A cry, weak and desperate, carried on the wind. Vaughn froze, listening intently. There it was again, coming from the direction of the old Silver Queen mine. He'd passed by the abandoned operation a few times before. No one had worked that claim in years. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" Silence answered him. Vaughn hesitated only a moment before returning to Buck, grabbing his canteen and the small medical kit he carried in his saddlebags. Life on the frontier had taught him to be prepared. "Wait here, boy," he told the horse, patting his neck before starting up the rocky path toward the mine entrance. The mouth of the Silver Queen gaped like an open wound in the mountainside. Weathered timbers framed the entrance, a faded sign hanging askew above it. Vaughn paused at the entrance, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. He wasn't a superstitious man, but abandoned mines had claimed many lives over the years, from cave-ins to bad air. "Hello," he called again, his voice echoing into the darkness. "Anyone in there?" This time, he thought he heard a faint sound in response, a whimper, perhaps, or a moan. Vaughn pulled a match from his pocket and struck it against the rough wall, the sudden flare of light momentarily blinding him. He spotted a discarded lantern near the entrance, its glass cracked but intact enough to serve. He lit the wick, adjusting it until it cast a steady glow. Lantern raised, Vaughn ventured into the mine, ducking beneath low-hanging support beams and stepping carefully over debris. The air grew cooler and danker as he moved deeper into the mountain. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing eerily. "I heard someone calling," he announced to the darkness. "I'm here to help." A faint noise drew him to the left, down a narrow passage where the support beams leaned precariously. Vaughn moved cautiously, aware that one wrong step could bring the whole tunnel down on his head. The lantern light fell upon a crumpled form pressed against the wall. For a moment, Vaughn thought he was looking at a discarded bundle of rags. Then the bundle moved and he realized with a shock that it was a woman. "Good Lord," he breathed, hurrying forward and kneeling beside her. She was in terrible shape. Blood matted her dark hair and stained her torn dress. Her face was so swollen and bruised that he could barely make out her features. "Madam," he set the lantern down and gently touched her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Willow flinched at the contact, a whimper escaping her split lips. Through the haze of pain and fear, she registered a man's voice different from the ones that had brought her here, different from the ones that had hurt her. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me." "I won't hurt you," Vaughn assured her, his voice soft but firm. "I'm going to get you out of here. You're safe now." Those words, "you're safe now," broke something inside her. Tears leaked from beneath her swollen eyelids as she tried to focus on the face hovering above her. She saw kind eyes in a sun-weathered face, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and a battered cowboy hat pushed back on his head. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, already assessing her injuries by the lantern light. "Willow," she managed. "Willow Reed." "Miss Reed, I'm Vaughn Zeller. I'm going to help you, but I need to move you. It might hurt." She nodded weakly, having no choice but to trust this stranger. He was gentle as he slipped one arm behind her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, but still she couldn't suppress a cry of pain as he lifted her. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Just hold on." Willow's world narrowed to the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat as he carried her through the dark tunnels. Consciousness came and went, darkness threatening to pull her under completely. Vaughn emerged from the mine into the fading daylight, cradling the battered woman against his chest. Buck was waiting where he'd left him, and the horse's ears pricked forward with interest as they approached. "We've got to get her to town," Vaughn told the horse, as if the animal could understand the urgency. He glanced down at Willow, noting her shallow breathing and the way her head lolled against his shoulder. She'd passed out again. With careful movements, he managed to mount Buck while still holding her. It was awkward and precarious, but he settled her across his lap, one arm securely around her to keep her from falling as he turned the horse toward Rawhide. Night was falling by the time they reached the outskirts of town. Lanterns glowed in windows, and the saloon was already alive with piano music and boisterous voices. Vaughn headed straight for the doctor's office, a small building on the east end of the main street. Dr. Samuel Thompson was just finishing his supper when Vaughn pounded on his door. The elderly physician took one look at the unconscious woman in the cowboy's arms and ushered them inside. "Put her on the examination table," he instructed, already rolling up his sleeves. "What happened to her?" "Found her in the old Silver Queen mine," Vaughn explained, carefully laying Willow down. "Looks like someone beat her badly and left her for dead." Dr. Thompson's bushy eyebrows drew together as he leaned in to examine Willow. "And who might you be, young man?" Vaughn Zeller. "Just passing through when I heard her calling for help." The doctor nodded absently, his attention focused on his patient. "Well, Mr. Zeller, it seems Providence put you on that trail today. This young woman wouldn't have survived the night in that mine." Vaughn removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Will she be all right? Too early to tell." The doctor gently probed Willow's ribs, frowning at her unconscious whimper. "Several broken ribs, extensive bruising, possible internal bleeding. She's lost a lot of blood." He looked up at Vaughn, his expression grave. "I'll need to clean her wounds and set her ribs. Then we wait and pray." Vaughn nodded, an unexpected surge of anger tightening his chest as he looked down at Willow's battered face. Who would do something like this? "That's a question for Sheriff Davis," Dr. Thompson replied. "Speaking of which, someone should inform him. This was no accident." "I'll go," Vaughn offered, settling his hat back on his head. "You take care of her." Dr. Thompson paused in his preparations to study the cowboy. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, sir. Just passing through." "Most men passing through would drop an injured stranger at the doctor's door and consider their duty done," the doctor observed. "Yet here you are, still concerned." Vaughn shifted uncomfortably under the doctor's scrutiny. "Just want to make sure she's taken care of. Seems like the decent thing to do." Dr. Thompson nodded slowly. "Indeed it is. Sheriff's office is 2 doors down from the saloon." As Vaughn turned to leave, Willow stirred on the table, her eyes fluttering open. "Wait," she called weakly, reaching out a trembling hand. Vaughn hesitated, then moved back to her side, taking her outstretched hand in his. Her fingers were cold and shaking. "I'm just going to fetch the sheriff, Miss Reed. The doctor will take good care of you." Fear clouded her bruised face. Don't tell them." Her voice was barely audible, her eyes darting anxiously around the room. "Don't tell who?" Vaughn asked, leaning closer. "Maxwell brothers," she whispered. "They did this. They'll kill me if they know I'm alive." Vaughn exchanged a look with the doctor. The Maxwell brothers were notorious in this part of Nevada, a family of cattle rustlers and thieves who had thus far managed to avoid the law through intimidation and violence. "You're safe now," Vaughn assured her, though he wasn't certain he could keep that promise. "Rest easy. We won't let anything happen to you." Her fingers tightened briefly around his before her eyes drifted shut again. Dr. Thompson moved in with a damp cloth, beginning to clean the dried blood from her face. "The Maxwell gang," the doctor murmured, shaking his head. "That's trouble, young man." Vaughn's jaw tightened. All the more reason to get the sheriff involved. But as he stepped out into the night, Vaughn wondered what he was getting himself into. He'd planned to be in Carson City by tomorrow, looking for work. Now, he found himself entangled in a situation involving one of the most dangerous families in the territory and a woman he'd just met. Still, as he walked toward the sheriff's office, he couldn't forget the way Willow had reached for his hand, the trust in her eyes despite all she'd endured. Something about her vulnerability stirred protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. Sheriff Thomas Davis was a tall, gaunt man with iron-gray hair and a perpetually stern expression. He listened to Vaughn's account with narrowed eyes, making notes in a small ledger. "The Maxwell boys, huh?" The sheriff sighed heavily, closing the ledger. "That complicates things." Surely you can arrest them, Vaughn pressed. The woman was nearly beaten to death. Sheriff Davis leaned back in his chair, regarding Vaughn with a weary expression. It's not that simple. The Maxwells have friends in high places and without corroborating witnesses. He shrugged. Her word against theirs won't be enough. Anger flared in Vaughn's chest. So they get away with attempted murder. I didn't say that, the sheriff replied sharply. I'll look into it. But if this young woman saw something she shouldn't have, she's still in danger. The Maxwells don't leave loose ends. Vaughn frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that once she's well enough to travel, it might be safer for her to be elsewhere. The sheriff stood, buckling on his gun belt. Let's go back to the doctor's. I need to hear her story firsthand. When they returned to Dr. Thompson's office, they found Willow awake, though clearly in pain. The doctor had cleaned her wounds and wrapped her ribs, and she was propped up slightly on the examination table, a blanket covering her torn dress. Miss Reed, the sheriff said, approaching her with hat in hand. I understand you've had a terrible ordeal. Feel up to telling me what happened. Willow's eyes found Vaughn standing just behind the sheriff. Something about his presence gave her courage. She took a shaky breath and began to speak. I'm a seamstress, she explained, her voice weak but determined. I've been staying at Mrs. Garner's boarding house for the past week, taking commissions. She paused, wincing as she shifted position. This morning, I was delivering a mended shirt to the livery stable. I heard voices around the back and I saw them. The Maxwell brothers and two other men I didn't recognize. They were dividing up money and arguing about something that had gone wrong. Willow's fingers twisted in the blanket. I tried to slip away, but they saw me. They grabbed me, demanded to know what I'd heard. I told them I hadn't heard anything important, but they didn't believe me. Tears welled in her eyes. They dragged me out of town. I tried to scream, but one of them had his hand over my mouth. They took me to that mine and she couldn't continue, her body shaking with silent sobs. Dr. Thompson stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. That's enough for now, Sheriff, he said firmly. She needs rest. Sheriff Davis nodded, making a few more notes in his ledger. Which ones were there, Miss Reed? There are 4 Maxwell brothers. Willow took a steadying breath. Victor and Lawrence for certain. I think the third might have been Emmett, but I'm not sure. He was the one who hit me first. The sheriff's face was grim as he pocketed his notebook. I'll have a word with them, but as I was explaining to Mr. Zeller here, without other witnesses, it's going to be difficult to make charges stick. They'll come after me again, Willow whispered, fear evident in every line of her face. Not while I'm around, Vaughn said, stepping forward. The words surprised him almost as much as they surprised the others in the room. Sheriff Davis raised an eyebrow. I thought you were just passing through, Mr. Zeller. Vaughn met Willow's gaze, seeing the hope that flickered there. My plans have changed. I'll stay in town until this matter is settled. That could be risky, the sheriff warned. The Maxwells don't take kindly to interference. Neither do I, Vaughn replied simply, later that night after the sheriff had gone and Dr. Thompson had retired to his quarters in the back. Vaughn sat in a chair beside the examination table where Willow rested. He'd offered to keep watch while the doctor got some sleep. You don't have to stay, Willow said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. You've already done more than enough. Vaughn looked up from the book he'd been pretending to read. In the soft lamplight, with her face cleaned of blood and her dark hair spread out on the pillow, he could see that, beneath the bruises, Willow Reed was a beautiful woman. I'm not in the habit of leaving unfinished business, he replied. Besides, I've got nowhere pressing to be. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. That's not true. I heard you tell the doctor you were headed to Carson City. Carson City will still be there when this is over." He closed the book, setting it aside. "Why don't you tell me about yourself, Miss Reed? What brings a seamstress all the way from—" He paused, realizing she hadn't mentioned where she was from. "Boston," she supplied. "And please call me Willow. Boston's a long way from Rawhide, Nevada." Willow's eyes grew distant. "I lost my parents and younger brother to influenza last winter. There was nothing left for me there, so I decided to head west. I've been traveling from town to town, using my sewing skills to earn my keep." Vaughn nodded, understanding the restlessness that drove her. He'd been drifting since he was 17, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. "What about you?" she asked. "Where are you from, Mr. Zeller?" "Vaughn," he corrected. "Originally from Missouri, but I haven't been back in more than a decade. Been working ranch jobs throughout the territories." "No family?" Her voice was soft, empathetic. He shook his head. "Father died in the war. Mother remarried a man I couldn't abide, left home at 17 and never looked back." Willow studied his face in the lamplight. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness about Vaughn Zeller that made her feel safe. If not for him, she would have died alone in that mine. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for finding me, for staying." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. "Try to get some sleep," Vaughn said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "Tomorrow's likely to be a long day." As Willow drifted off to sleep, Vaughn remained vigilant, his mind turning over the problem of the Maxwell brothers. They wouldn't take kindly to their victim being found alive, nor to the sheriff questioning them. Vaughn had no illusions about the kind of men they were. He'd encountered their type before. He checked his revolver, making sure it was fully loaded. He hadn't come to Rawhide looking for trouble, but he wasn't about to walk away from it either, not with Willow's life at stake. Morning brought a change in Willow's condition. Her fever had risen during the night, and Dr. Thompson's face was grave as he examined her. "The wound on her side is infected," he told Vaughn. "I've cleaned it again and applied a poultice, but she needs to be watched carefully." Vaughn looked down at Willow's flushed face. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot to the touch. "What can I do?" "Keep her cool with damp cloths," the doctor instructed. "Try to get her to drink whenever she's conscious. I need to make my rounds, but I'll be back as soon as I can." The morning passed slowly as Vaughn tended to Willow. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring incoherently, other times crying out in fear as if reliving the attack. Each time, Vaughn spoke to her soothingly, assuring her she was safe. Around midday, Sheriff Davis returned. His expression told Vaughn everything he needed to know before the lawman even spoke. "The Maxwells claim they haven't seen Miss Reed," the sheriff reported. "Say they were playing cards at the Lucky Strike Saloon all yesterday. The bartender backs their story." "You and I both know they're lying," Vaughn said, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb Willow. "Knowing and proving are different matters," Sheriff Davis replied wearily. "How is she?" "Fever. The doctor says one of her wounds is infected." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I've put the word out to my deputies to keep an eye on the Maxwell place. If they make a move toward town, we'll know." After the sheriff left, Vaughn continued his vigil. As the afternoon wore on, Willow's fever climbed higher. She tossed restlessly on the narrow table, her hair damp with sweat despite the cool cloths Vaughn applied to her forehead. "Don't leave me," she murmured during one moment of semi-consciousness, her hand finding his. "I'm right here," he assured her, squeezing her fingers gently. "I'm not going anywhere." It was strange how quickly she had come to matter to him. Vaughn had always prided himself on his independence, on needing no one and being needed by no one in return. Yet in the span of less than a day, this woman had somehow broken through the careful walls he'd built around himself. Dr. Thompson returned in the late afternoon, his expression growing more concerned as he checked Willow's temperature. "The infection's getting worse," he said grimly. "I'm going to have to reopen the wound, clean it more thoroughly." Vaughn winced at the thought. "Will that help?" "It's her only chance," the doctor replied. "I need you to hold her still. This won't be pleasant." What followed was one of the most difficult experiences of Vaughn's life. Willow screamed when the doctor cut into the infected wound, her body arching off the table despite Vaughn's efforts to hold her steady. The sound tore at his heart, but he forced himself to remain strong for her sake. When it was over, Willow lapsed into unconsciousness again, her body limp with exhaustion. Dr. Thompson looked nearly as drained as he washed the blood from his hands. "Now we wait," he said. "If the fever breaks by morning, she has a good chance. If not—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Vaughn understood the gravity of the situation. He returned to his post beside Willow, determined to see her through the night. As darkness fell, Vaughn heard a commotion outside, raised voices, and the sound of horses approaching at speed. He tensed, his hand moving to his revolver as the door to the doctor's office burst open. Lawrence Maxwell stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his brothers. All three men were armed, their expressions leaving no doubt about their intentions. "Well, well," Lawrence drawled, his eyes fixing on Willow's unconscious form. "Looks like the little seamstress is tougher than we thought." Vaughn rose to his feet, positioning himself between the Maxwells and Willow. "You've made a mistake coming here," Lawrence sneered. "The mistake was letting her live in the first place. We're here to correct that error." 3 against 1, Vaughn observed coolly. "Those aren't very sporting odds." "We're not here for sport, Cowboy," Victor Maxwell snarled. "Step aside if you want to live." Vaughn's hand hovered near his holster. He was fast, but he wasn't fool enough to think he could outdraw 3 men. Still, he had no intention of moving. "The sheriff knows it was you," he said, playing for time. "Killing her now will only seal your fate." Lawrence laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Sheriff Davis can't touch us. This town knows who runs things around here." "Maybe so," Vaughn agreed, "but I'm not from this town and I don't much care who you think you are." The tension in the room was palpable, each man measuring the other, waiting for someone to make the first move. Vaughn knew his chances were slim, but he'd made a promise to keep Willow safe, and he intended to honor it. The standoff was broken by the sound of a shotgun being cocked. Dr. Thompson emerged from the back room, the double-barreled weapon steady in his hands. "I believe it's time for you gentlemen to leave," the doctor said, his voice remarkably calm. "This is a place of healing, not violence." Lawrence Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "You're making a big mistake, Doc." "The only mistake was allowing your family to terrorize this town for so long," Dr. Thompson replied. "Now go, before I forget my Hippocratic oath." For a moment, it seemed like the Maxwells might ignore the threat. Then Lawrence gave a curt nod to his brothers and they backed toward the door. "This isn't over," Lawrence warned, his gaze moving from the doctor to Vaughn before settling on Willow's unconscious form. "Not by a long shot." After they left, Dr. Thompson lowered the shotgun with shaking hands. "They'll be back," he said grimly, "with more men next time." Vaughn nodded, his mind racing. "We need to move her. Somewhere safe until she's well enough to travel. Move her in this condition." The doctor shook his head. "It could kill her." "Staying here definitely will," Vaughn countered. "Do you have any suggestions, Doctor?" Thompson considered for a moment. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles north of town. It belongs to the Peterson Ranch, but they don't use it much this time of year. It's remote, hard to find if you don't know where to look." "Can you draw me a map?" The doctor nodded. I can do better than that. I can take you there. Within the hour, they had Willow bundled in blankets and loaded into the doctor's buggy. Vaughn rode alongside on Buck, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. The night was clear, the moon providing enough light to navigate the rough trail that led away from town. The line shack was a simple one-room structure nestled in a stand of pines near a small creek. It was basic but solid, with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and a table with 2 chairs. Dr. Thompson helped Vaughn settle Willow on the bed before unpacking the medical supplies he'd brought. I'll need to get back before dawn, the doctor explained. If I'm gone too long, they'll get suspicious, but I'll come check on her tomorrow night if I can. Vaughn nodded, helping the older man start a fire in the fireplace. What do I need to do for her? Dr. Thompson gave him detailed instructions for caring for Willow's wounds and managing her fever. The next 24 hours are critical, he concluded. If the fever breaks, she'll likely recover. If not, I understand, Vaughn said, accepting a bundle of supplies from the doctor: food, extra bandages, and a bottle of laudanum for Willow's pain. After the doctor left, Vaughn secured the cabin's single door and window before returning to Willow's side. In the firelight, her skin had a translucent quality, beads of sweat standing out against her pale forehead. "Hang in there, Willow," he murmured, gently wiping her face with a damp cloth. "You've made it this far. Don't give up now." The night stretched endlessly as Vaughn maintained his vigil. He changed Willow's bandages as the doctor had shown him, coaxed water between her cracked lips whenever she stirred, and kept the fire burning to ward off the chill of the mountain night. In her delirium, Willow called out for her parents, pleaded with invisible attackers, and sometimes clutched at Vaughn's hand as if he were the only anchor in a stormy sea. During those moments, he found himself talking to her, telling her about his childhood in Missouri, about the wild beauty of the territories he'd traversed, about the life he imagined for himself someday when he stopped drifting. "I've always thought I might settle in Montana," he told her as dawn approached. "There's a valley I passed through once, green and fertile, with mountains on 3 sides and a river running clear and cold. A man could build something there, something that would last." Willow's eyes fluttered open, more lucid than they'd been in hours. "It sounds beautiful," she whispered. Vaughn started, surprised to find her conscious. "You're awake." A faint smile touched her lips. For the moment, her gaze wandered around the cabin. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe," he assured her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted. Her hand found his, her fingers weakly curling around his calloused palm. "You're still here. I told you I would be." Willow's eyes searched his face. "Why? You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Vaughn considered her question. Why had he stayed? Why was he risking his life for a woman he'd just met? He could have left her with the doctor, continued on his way to Carson City, and never looked back. But something about Willow Reed had touched him deeply: her courage in the face of brutality, her determination to survive, the way she'd reached for his hand when she was afraid. "Let's just say I've got my reasons," he replied finally. "Now try to rest. You need your strength." Willow held his gaze a moment longer before her eyes drifted shut again. But her hand remained in his, a tenuous connection that somehow felt stronger than the short time they'd known each other would suggest. As the sun rose, Vaughn checked Willow's temperature again. The fever seemed to be holding steady, not worse, but not better either. He changed her bandages, noting with relief that the infected wound looked somewhat less angry than it had the day before. Throughout the day, he divided his time between caring for Willow and securing their hideout. He scouted the surrounding area, identifying potential escape routes and vantage points where he could spot approaching riders. He gathered firewood, refilled their water containers from the creek, and tended to Buck, ensuring the horse was ready in case they needed to leave quickly. Willow drifted in and out of consciousness, each period of lucidity lasting a bit longer than the one before. By late afternoon, she was able to sit up slightly, propped against the wall, and take some broth that Vaughn had prepared from the supplies Dr. Thompson had left. "The Maxwell brothers," she said suddenly as Vaughn helped her drink. "They came to the doctor's office, didn't they? I remember voices, threats." Vaughn saw no point in lying. "They did. That's why we moved you here." Fear clouded her eyes. "They won't stop looking." "No, they won't," he agreed. "Which is why, once you're strong enough, we need to get you far away from Rawhide." Willow's hands trembled around the cup. "Where would I go?" "Wherever you want," Vaughn replied. "California, Oregon, Montana, somewhere the Maxwells have no reach." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "I have no money for such a journey. Everything I owned was in my room at the boarding house." "We'll figure something out," Vaughn assured her, taking the empty cup from her hands. "For now, just focus on getting your strength back." As night fell, Vaughn grew increasingly alert for any sign of Dr. Thompson's return. The doctor had promised to try to visit, bringing additional supplies and checking on Willow's condition. But hour after hour passed with no sign of him. "Something's wrong," Vaughn muttered, peering out the window at the moonlit clearing. "He should have been here by now." Willow watched him from the bed, her face pale but her eyes clearer than they had been. Perhaps he couldn't get away without arousing suspicion. "Maybe," Vaughn conceded, though his instincts told him otherwise. "I'm going to check the perimeter again." He stepped outside, the cool night air a relief after the stuffy confines of the cabin. Buck nickered softly from where he was picketed in a small stand of trees, ears pricked forward. Vaughn tensed, his hand dropping to his revolver. "Easy, boy," he murmured, scanning the darkness. "What is it?" A twig snapped somewhere to his left. Vaughn drew his gun, stepping into the shadow of a large pine. Another sound, the creak of saddle leather, followed by a hushed voice. "Spread out. They're here somewhere." Vaughn's blood ran cold. The Maxwells had found them. Moving silently, he made his way back to the cabin. Willow looked up in alarm as he burst through the door. "We've got company," he told her tersely. "Can you walk?" She nodded, already struggling to sit up. "I think so, if you help me." Vaughn gathered their few belongings, stuffing them into his saddlebags. "We need to leave now. They've got us surrounded, but there's a ravine on the north side. If we can make it there, we might be able to slip away." He helped Willow to her feet, steadying her as she swayed. Her face was drawn with pain, but determination shone in her eyes. "I'm ready." They slipped out the back window, Vaughn going first and then helping Willow through. The night was their ally, shadows concealing their movements as they crept toward where Buck was tethered. They had almost reached the horse when a voice called out from the darkness. "I wouldn't try it, Cowboy." Lawrence Maxwell stepped into a patch of moonlight, rifle raised. Behind him, his brothers and two other men emerged from the trees, effectively cutting off any escape route. Vaughn pushed Willow behind him, his revolver steady in his hand. "This ends now, Maxwell." Lawrence smiled, the expression devoid of warmth. "You're right about that." He gestured with his rifle. "Drop the gun, or my brothers will fill you with so many holes you'll look like a sieve." Vaughn hesitated, calculating their chances. 5 against 1, with Willow too weak to run. The odds weren't good. "Don't," Willow whispered behind him. "They'll kill us both either way." She was right, Vaughn knew. Men like the Maxwells didn't leave witnesses. His finger tightened on the trigger. Before he could decide, a shot rang out from the trees to their right. One of the Maxwell brothers cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. Another shot followed, and another of the men went down. "Take cover," Vaughn shouted, pulling Willow down behind a fallen log as gunfire erupted all around them. Through the chaos, he caught glimpses of riders 3, maybe 4 firing on the Maxwell gang from the tree line. Lawrence and his remaining men returned fire, the night exploding with muzzle flashes and the acrid smell of gunpowder. "Sheriff's men?" Willow asked, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. "I don't think so," Vaughn replied, keeping his body between her and the flying bullets. "But whoever they are, they're giving us a chance." When there was a brief lull in the shooting, Vaughn made his move. "Stay low," he instructed Willow, helping her toward Buck. The horse was skittish from the gunfire but calmed at Vaughn's touch. Vaughn boosted Willow into the saddle, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he murmured and kicked Buck into motion, heading for the ravine he'd scouted earlier. Shots followed them, bullets whining past their heads as they plunged into the darkness. Buck was sure-footed despite the rough terrain, carrying them down the steep slope and into the sheltering shadows of the ravine. Vaughn didn't slow their pace until they were at least a mile from the cabin, the sounds of gunfire fading behind them. Only then did he rein Buck to a walk, allowing the horse to catch his breath. "Are you all right?" he asked Willow, who was leaning heavily against him. "Yes," she replied, though her voice was strained. "Who were those men?" "I don't know," Vaughn admitted, "but they bought us time to escape." They rode through the night, following the ravine until it opened onto a broad valley. Vaughn kept to the shadows, avoiding open ground where they might be spotted. Willow remained silent, but he could feel the tension in her body, the way she occasionally shivered despite the blanket he'd wrapped around her shoulders. Near dawn, they reached a small homestead nestled against the foothills. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a dog barked as they approached. Vaughn drew rein, studying the place warily. "We need to rest," he told Willow. "You're in no condition to keep riding, and Buck needs a breather." "What if they followed us?" "I don't think they did, but we can't keep going without some help." He helped her down from the saddle, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. "Let me do the talking." The door of the cabin opened before they reached it, a gray-haired woman with a shotgun appearing on the porch. "That's far enough," she called. "State your business." Vaughn raised one hand, the other still supporting Willow. "We mean no harm, madam. My friend is injured and needs rest. We can pay for your trouble." The woman's eyes narrowed as she took in their disheveled appearance. "What kind of trouble are you in?" "The kind that stays behind us if we're lucky," Vaughn replied honestly. After a moment's consideration, the woman lowered her shotgun. "Come in, then. But I'll keep this handy, just in case your trouble catches up." Her name was Martha Winters, a widow who had been running the small ranch on her own since her husband's death 3 years earlier. She helped Vaughn settle Willow on a narrow bed in the corner of the cabin's main room before setting water to boil. "She's got a fever," Martha observed, placing a weathered hand on Willow's forehead, "and those bandages need changing." Vaughn nodded gratefully. "We had to leave in a hurry, didn't bring all our supplies." Martha gave him a shrewd look. "Maxwell boys after you." Vaughn's surprise must have shown on his face, because Martha nodded knowingly. "Thought as much. They've been getting bolder lately, thinking they own everything between here and Carson City." As Martha tended to Willow, Vaughn explained their situation, finding Willow in the mine, the confrontation at the doctor's office, and their narrow escape from the line shack. "You're lucky to be alive," Martha commented when he finished. "The Maxwells don't usually leave loose ends." "We had help," Vaughn admitted, "though I'm not sure from whom." Martha smiled mysteriously. "Not everyone in these parts bows to the Maxwells. There are those who have been waiting for a chance to stand against them." She offered them sanctuary for a few days, time for Willow to regain her strength. "My son Jacob rides circuit as a deputy marshal," she explained. "He'll be through here in about a week. He can escort you to Carson City if you like." The offer was tempting, but Vaughn was wary of staying in one place too long. "We're grateful, but we don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble finds its own way," Martha replied philosophically, "and I'm not as helpless as I might appear." She patted the shotgun that was never far from her reach. "Besides, Jacob left me with 2 ranch hands who are currently out checking the north pasture. They'll be back by nightfall." With little choice, Vaughn accepted her hospitality. Martha showed him where he could tend to Buck, then set about preparing a hearty meal for her unexpected guests. By afternoon, Willow's fever had broken at last. She slept peacefully, her breathing easier than it had been in days. Vaughn sat beside her, relief washing over him as he watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. "She's a fighter," Martha observed, joining him at Willow's bedside. "Most women wouldn't have survived what she's been through." Vaughn nodded, a surge of admiration and something deeper swelling in his chest as he looked at Willow. "She's remarkable." Martha studied him with knowing eyes. "You care for her." It wasn't a question, but Vaughn found himself answering anyway. "I hardly know her." "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Martha replied softly. "My Henry asked me to marry him 3 days after we met. Everyone said we were crazy, that it wouldn't last." A sad smile touched her lips. "We had 32 years together before pneumonia took him." Vaughn didn't respond, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. His feelings for Willow were complicated, a mixture of protectiveness, admiration, and something he wasn't ready to name. The next few days passed quietly. True to Martha's word, her ranch hands returned that evening 2 weather-beaten men named Carl and Thomas, who asked few questions and seemed unperturbed by the presence of strangers in their employer's home. Willow grew stronger each day. By the 3rd morning, she was able to sit at the table for meals, and by the 4th, she could walk short distances without assistance. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, revealing the delicate features beneath. On the 5th day, as Vaughn was helping Martha mend a fence near the barn, Willow joined them outside for the first time. She wore a simple dress borrowed from Martha, too large for her slender frame, but clean and whole, unlike her own tattered garments. "It's a beautiful day," she remarked, tilting her face to the sun. "I was beginning to forget what sunshine felt like." Vaughn found himself smiling at the simple pleasure in her voice. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied, almost human again. Martha excused herself to check on dinner, leaving them alone. Willow moved closer to Vaughn, her step still slightly tentative. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done." Vaughn shook his head. "No thanks needed." "Yes, there is," she insisted. "You risked your life for a stranger. You're still risking it." He set down the hammer he'd been using, turning to face her fully. In the sunlight, her hair shone with rich chestnut highlights and her eyes a deep, clear blue he hadn't fully appreciated before held his gaze steadily. "You're not a stranger anymore," he said simply. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the bond that had formed through danger and shared hardship. Willow's hand rose hesitantly, touching his cheek in a gesture so gentle it made his heart ache. "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose I'm not." The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Vaughn tensed, stepping in front of Willow as he scanned the horizon. 3 men on horseback were approaching the ranch from the east, still too distant to identify. Martha emerged from the cabin, shotgun in hand. "Get inside," she told them tersely. "Could be trouble." They retreated to the cabin, watching through the window as Martha went to meet the riders. Vaughn kept his revolver ready, prepared to defend Willow if necessary. As the riders drew closer, Martha's posture relaxed. She lowered the shotgun, raising a hand in greeting. One of the men dismounted, embracing her warmly. "It's Jacob," Willow realized. "Her son." Martha led the men to the cabin, entering first. "It's all right," she assured them. "This is my son Jacob and his fellow deputies, Bill and Michael." Jacob Winters was a tall, broad-shouldered man with his mother's gray eyes and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He nodded to Vaughn and Willow. "Ma told me you've had some trouble with the Maxwells." "That's putting it mildly," Vaughn replied. Jacob's expression was grim. "Well, you'll be interested to know that Lawrence Maxwell and 2 of his brothers are dead," Willow gasped. "Dead? How?" "Gunfight at their ranch yesterday," Jacob explained. "Seems they crossed the wrong people. A gang of cattle rustlers they double-crossed caught up with them. By the time we got word of the shooting, it was all over." Vaughn and Willow exchanged a look of disbelief. The threat that had been hanging over them had suddenly, unexpectedly, vanished. "What about Victor?" Vaughn asked. "He was at the line shack that night. Wounded but alive," Jacob replied. "He's in custody in Carson City, facing charges for that and a dozen other crimes. He won't be a free man again in this lifetime." Relief washed over Willow's face. "It's over then." "Looks that way," Jacob agreed. "Sheriff Davis sends his regards, by the way. Seems he's feeling rather apologetic about not providing better protection." Martha invited the deputies to stay for dinner, and the evening turned unexpectedly festive. For the first time since he'd found her in the mine, Vaughn saw Willow truly relax, even laughing at Jacob's stories about his adventures as a deputy marshal. Later, as the others sat around the fire sharing tales, Vaughn stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. He leaned against the porch railing, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. He'd come to Nevada looking for work, nothing more. Now, less than 2 weeks later, he found himself caught up in events he couldn't have imagined. And more significantly, he found himself reluctant to continue his solitary wandering. The door opened behind him, and Willow stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Mind some company?" "Not at all," he replied, making room for her at the railing. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, shoulders nearly touching as they gazed at the star-filled sky. Finally, Willow spoke. "Jacob offered to escort me to Carson City tomorrow," she said softly. "From there, I could catch the stage to Sacramento." Vaughn's chest tightened at the thought of her leaving, but he nodded. "California's a good place for a fresh start." "Yes," she hesitated, her fingers plucking at the fringe of her shawl. "What about you? Will you continue to Carson City as you planned?" It was the question he'd been asking himself. Before meeting Willow, the answer would have been simple: find work for a season, save some money, then move on when restlessness took hold again. But now, the prospect of returning to that lonely existence held little appeal. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Those ranch jobs will still be there, I suppose." Willow turned to face him, her expression earnest in the moonlight. "Come with me to California." The directness of her invitation surprised him. "Willow, I know it sounds impulsive," she hurried on, "but these past days, I've never felt as safe with anyone as I do with you, and I hope that you might feel something for me too." Vaughn looked into her eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the courage it had taken to speak so openly. In that moment, he knew he couldn't simply ride away from her. "I do feel something," he admitted quietly. "More than I expected to, more than I've felt for anyone in a long time." Her smile was radiant, transforming her face despite the lingering bruises. "Then say yes. It won't be easy," he warned. starting over in a new place. Nothing worthwhile ever is, she replied, but we've survived worse together already, haven't we? Vaughn chuckled at that, the tension easing from his shoulders. I suppose we have. He reached out, taking her hand in his. It fit perfectly, her slender fingers entwining with his calloused ones, a perfect match of strength and gentleness. California it is, then, he said, and sealed the promise with a kiss. The journey to Carson City took 2 days, with Jacob and his deputies providing an escort. Willow's strength returned more each day, and by the time they reached the bustling town, she was able to ride on her own, borrowing a gentle mare from Martha's stable. They parted from Jacob with heartfelt thanks and promises to write once they were settled. Then, with the money Martha had insisted on giving them, consider it an investment in your future. She'd said firmly, when they protested they booked passage on the next stagecoach to Sacramento. The journey west was arduous, but filled with a sense of possibility that made the hardships bearable. Willow and Vaughn learned more about each other with each passing mile, her dreams of opening her own dressmaking shop, his secret passion for woodworking, the books they both loved, the fears they'd never shared with anyone else. By the time they reached Sacramento, what had begun as an unexpected connection formed in Crisis had deepened into something neither of them could deny. They found lodging in a modest boarding house and began building their new life together. Willow's skill as a seamstress quickly earned her a reputation among Sacramento's growing population of respectable families. Vaughn found work at a lumber mill, saving every spare penny toward their shared dream, a small homestead of their own, perhaps with room for Willow's shop and a workshop where he could craft furniture during the winter months. 6 months after their arrival in California, on a perfect spring morning with wildflowers carpeting the hills around Sacramento, Vaughn asked Willow to be his wife. They were married in a simple ceremony, Martha Winters making the journey from Nevada to stand as Willow's matron of honor. I knew it the moment I saw you two together, Martha confided later, as the small wedding party celebrated at a local restaurant. Some things are just meant to be. Vaughn looked at his bride, radiant in a gown she had made herself, her face now unmarked by the cruelty she had endured. I think you're right, he agreed, raising his glass in a toast. To things meant to be. By their first anniversary, they had saved enough to purchase a small parcel of land on the outskirts of town, 5 acres with a modest house that needed work but had good bones, as Vaughn put it. There was a creek running along the eastern boundary, and enough level ground to plant a garden and perhaps, eventually, add a separate building for Willow's dress shop. As they stood on their new property that first evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willow leaned against her husband's solid strength. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked softly. "A year ago, I was fighting for my life in that mine." Vaughn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I try not to think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you." She turned in his embrace, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "But you found me. You heard my cries when no one else did." "Best decision I ever made," he murmured against her lips. "Taking that trail past the Silver Queen mine." "It wasn't a decision," Willow corrected him with a smile. "It was fate." As twilight deepened around them, Vaughn had to agree, some things were indeed meant to be. Over the next 5 years, their homestead flourished under their care. The house was transformed with Vaughn's carpentry skills and Willow's eye for beauty. A workshop rose behind the house, where Vaughn crafted furniture that began to sell as readily as Willow's dresses and fine tailoring. They added a proper shop for her business, with large windows that filled the space with light as she worked. They made friends in the growing community, other young couples building their futures, families who appreciated Willow's skilled needlework and Vaughn's sturdy furniture. Letters arrived regularly from Martha Winters, keeping them connected to the place where their journey together had begun. In their 3rd year of marriage, Willow gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Vaughn's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, named for Willow's mother. Their home rang with children's laughter, the shadows of the past receding further with each passing season. On the 5th anniversary of the day Vaughn had found Willow in the abandoned mine, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the distant hills. Thomas, now a sturdy 2-year-old with his father's determined chin and his mother's blue eyes, was showing his baby sister how to pet the family's gentle old dog. "I've been thinking," Willow said, her hand finding Vaughn's, "about expanding the dress shop. Mrs. Miller asked if I would consider taking on her daughter as an apprentice." Vaughn smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "You should do it. You've always said you wanted to pass on your skills." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful as she watched the children. "It's strange to think about it, building something that might outlast us, a legacy of sorts. Isn't that what we've been doing all along?" Vaughn asked, gesturing to their home, their children, the life they'd built together. "Creating something that will endure." Willow's smile was radiant as she leaned against him. "Yes, I suppose it is." As dusk settled over their homestead, Vaughn reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate cry in an abandoned mine to this moment of profound contentment. He had spent so many years drifting, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. Now he couldn't imagine any other life than this one, with Willow and their children. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of all they had survived together, all they had built. Willow's eyes met his, still holding the same strength and courage that had captured his heart from the beginning. "And I love you, always will." In the gathering darkness, with their children's laughter a sweet counterpoint to the chorus of evening birdsong, Vaughn and Willow Zeller embraced their future, a future born from the darkest of beginnings, but transformed by love into something beautiful and enduring. And as stars began to appear in the velvet sky above their home, Vaughn knew with absolute certainty that no gold mine in the Western Territories could have yielded a treasure more precious than the woman he had found in that abandoned shaft, the woman who had given him not just her heart, but a place to finally, truly belong.